Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the All Portable Discussion Zone. We are a bi-weekly live stream all about amateur radio portable ops. And my name is Charlie. The call sign is November Juliet 7 Victor. With me this evening is Brian, W7JET. He's one of the two co-hosts. Dan is out on the East Coast doing some other things, so we'll excuse him today. And I'm pleased to introduce you to tonight's guest, Gaston, KT7RUN.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yep. And of course, as always, we welcome all of you who are in the chat. We hope that you enjoy the show. Leave your comments and questions in there, and we'll try to get to those that are relevant to our conversation. Thank you for being here. And don't forget, we convert this to a podcast, and it's made available about 24 hours after the show. So let's go ahead and get caught up on what's going on in our worlds and what we've been up to. I'm going to have to change my blinds here in a minute as soon as my turn's over because I got the sun in my eyes. But so I just got back from Quartz Fest, I think yesterday, yeah. And it was pretty fun. I think I just missed Gaston. He was out there as well. And while I was out at Quartz Fest, I was staying with Jason, Ham Radio 2.0, and Frank, Tank Radio, in their RV. And I had a great time sharing the living space with them and cooking for them and enjoying their company. We did one soda activation while I was there and one POTA activation. And so I've got to get going though, because I have only that's it for January so far. It's already January's almost over. I usually do a lot more than that. Somebody in the comments to the live stream I did up on top of the summit said, "Hey, it's been a couple months since I've even seen you go out with an alert." So yeah, it's been a while, but that's what I've been up to, and look forward to seeing what the reports are from Frank and Jason right after this live stream. Jason is going to go live, I think, an hour after this live stream goes live, and maybe 2 when he gets home, and he's going to give a full report of Quartz Fest. So that's what I'm up to, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian while I change my blinds here.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's Brian, W7JET. So this week, well, since our last meeting, actually, just been busy doing a little bit of soda. Did some stuff in the snow up in the Sholo area. It was definitely cold up there. Got a POTA activation in 2 in Safford last week. Played a little bit in the 160-meter the CQ Worldwide 160-meter CW contest, and got to exercise my new receive antenna a little bit. And if you've never used a receive antenna on the low band, such as 160 meters, 80 meters, 40 meters, it is, especially if you're using a vertical, it's life-changing. I mean, it's going from noise and almost unintelligible to, wow, it sounds like the guy's sitting in the shack right next to me. So if you got a receive port on the radio and you got a little bit of room, I highly recommend putting up some kind of a receive antenna. It definitely makes a difference on the low bands.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, Charlie, I have to, you have to come by one night in the evening and just experience 80 meters with the receive antenna. It is, I'm not kidding when I say it's life-changing. It's actually I can't believe I didn't do this sooner, because it was that much of a difference. It was, I just beyond blowing my doors off.
Awesome. Cool.
All right. So that's what I've been up to. I did 180 contacts in a little over 4.5 hours on 160 meter CW during the contest. Farthest station worked was PJ2T and Hawaii.
Awesome. That's great, Ryan. Good deal. All right, Gaston, what have you been up to?
Hey guys, well, first, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a busy month playing amateur radio. I kicked off the month doing a targeted contact with Jason, KM4ACK, and then went to a local ham fest just to meet the people, set up as a vendor, sell some wares, and went to Quartz Fest early. I went last Sunday, left Wednesday, so Charlie, you and I just missed each other. Met Jason, Ham Radio 2.0 in person, Chuck, KK6USY, and Kevin out of Utah, K7SW. So those guys were a lot of fun to hang out with, and experimented with the new link dipole that I'm working on with Tim Ortiz, N9SAB, and then rounded out the end of this month by doing soda for the first time in a very long time this morning. And by sheer happenstance, I made a contact with Brian. So a lot of fun, and now we're here.
Cool. Yeah, let me just mention too, before we hop into things, there's a couple housekeeping items. So Here we go. Richie's Radio Room, once again, as usual, always comes in with some sort of a donation. Thank you so much, Richie. Richie's Radio Room. I think he goes by, gosh, I can't remember what he goes by. I think it's Izzy or something like that. But thank you. And then says a few people have posted in here that Hayden booted everybody over to here. So thanks to Hayden. And then the last thing is, yeah, for Quartz Fest, I did mention Jason and Frank were there in camp. But in addition to Frank and Jason being in camp, they were the ones I stayed with. We also had Chuck, KK7USY there. We had Javi, what is it, K6 TNT. And then we had Lou and Kevin. It was a big group of people. So it would have been fun to have Adam, who had to kind of scoot out last minute and didn't make it. And I think there was talk of Josh being there as well. And of course, yeah, unfortunately, I missed you, Gaston. It was a great time, though. So, all right, well, let's get going. Let's talk about some QRP portable and see what we have, portable ops to talk about today. First thing I wanted to bring up, Gaston, is your most recent post here that is on Instagram. Let me bring this up and share the screen here, and we'll take a look at that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, so I've been enjoying making topical series on YouTube. It helps with a lot of focus, and I'm starting a new one that's airing this coming Saturday at 1400 UTC, and it's called Improvised Field Comms. And I thought to challenge myself, I would simulate a scenario while doing a long overdue soda this morning of simulating a failure with my HT and trying to improvise a quarter wave vertical. So that's a shot of Apache Butte out here in New River, Arizona, and with a little BNC binding post or cobra head at the top with a little piece of wire, 19 inches, connected to the center insulating pin there, and just tied to about a 20-inch, I think that's a mesquite branch I found on the ground, rubber banded, and I was able to activate that peak, had 5.9 signal reports across the board, and even did a summit to summit with Brian. And nobody knew that I was running this setup on my end, so it worked out improvising that little setup in the field.
That's really cool. And then let me scroll through the other picture here. That's what is that?
So this is my antenna kit. It's about half the size of an Altoids tin, and it's typically what I carry for my HTs. So I've got the cobra head binding post there. There's a little bit of electrical tape on each post, and I continuously reuse that stuff. And this is the first time I've used it for an HT. Typically, I use it to improvise a dipole, like for 10 meters or whatever on HF. Moving down, there's a little bit of 26 gauge wire there on the bottom left-hand corner. So I cut off about 19 inches for this exercise to make it a quarter wave on 2 meters. That little guy right in the center of the wire is an SMA to BNC connector for the Japanese radios, just because all of my equipment goes to BNC. And then just a couple of other pieces. There's a BNC male-to-male coupler there. So if I need to connect to RG316 cables in the field, works out pretty well. I can even connect that to the cobra head on the bottom and then directly connect the feed line to it as well. So that little male-to-male is handy. And then I've run into issues where sometimes I need to go to a PL259 coax. So that last little connector there is SMA to SO239. Pretty lightweight and something that's always in my my comms kit when I go out.
Cool. And then this is just kind of another look at the twig and the rubber band and all that.
Yeah, and literally, I think in real time I filmed this. It was less than a 2-minute build to actually put it together and get on the air.
Yeah. So your plan is then to have more video, So you first of all, you videoed this, right? This is just kind of the Instagram post, but there's an actual video out there on your channel, right?
There will be this Saturday. So all the audio survives. So there's probably going to be about a 10-minute video. And the format, I like to do in a lot of the videos that are series based, is start out with the goal or objective of what I want to solve, go out, do the field exercise. So those two have been recorded. And then day afterwards, I'll go into the shack and just reflect on what happened, what worked out, what did not work out, and do an after action reports of sorts. So it'll probably be about 12 or so minutes. The biggest fail here was actually my shoes. I've been trail running with a pair of Brooks shoes now And I was reading a book called Born to Run about a year ago, and they advocated for um, wearing your shoes past the 300 or 400 miles. And I've been wearing them now for coming up on over a year and a half. And I have like 2,400 miles logged, and they pretty much fell apart while bushwhacking today. The toe
Oh
box.
no.
And so that was really the only fail. None of it was actually radio related.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what I plan to do for probably 3 or 4 videos in a row for the next month or so is these field videos.
Cool. Well, we're going to turn it over to Brian. Before I do that, let me just, while we're on this topic specifically, let's see if we can find your channel and point people to that. The Tech Prepper. And just do a search in YouTube and you pop right up. Here's your channel. So I'd direct people to go check out his YouTube channel. So Brian, what do you have to, any questions on what he was talking about? You're muted.
That's why I'm not a professional and I'm an amateur. So I was actually going to start off with a little bit of a failure of my own story, which was we talked about a little bit in the pre-show. I had on Rockpile Peak, which Charlie remembers. He actually activated it after the second time I activated it was with him. The first time was the initial activation, and it's a big pile of rocks. And I was up on top of it, and I had a rock roll down and actually crushed the BNC connector going to my antenna. And I was like, well,
Whoa.
crap, this was a pain in the neck to get up on top of. I'm just going to roll the dice. So I took out my knife. I cut the PL259 connector off the end of the wire, stripped the wire, put the center conductor in the end of the BNC, and then wrapped the braid around the outside. And it worked. Ended up making a bunch of contacts on HF that way using tape and a knife. So sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get it going. So yeah. So I was actually going to ask Gaston about the no random contacts. So I watched a little bit about that, and it was really interesting to me. I like that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I got a lot of feedback early on from people that were operators, or were not ham radio operators just yet. And their big question to me was, which radio do I buy? Which antenna do I get? And I would go back and ask them, well, what is your objective? What do you want to solve? What do you want amateur radio to do for you? Because the radio service, the radio, the antenna, all of that is really based on your communications goals. So I came up with this idea of starting with these like concentric rings of communication, starting with ring 0, which is the community. So what can I do for my local community? No more than like 3 or 4 blocks to respond to things like maybe there's a long-term power outage or something and the neighbors need to keep in contact and there's no cell or internet. So came up with MERS. I figure it was like a good way to use that service, really inexpensive radios. And then next series, I kind of went to what I called ring 1, which was your city, then the county, then the state, the region. And then I closed with the country with a contact targeted from Arizona to Tennessee with Jason KM4 ACK. And again, in each one of those, I walked the viewer through how far, how I selected the radio service, which radio, how much power, what time of day, and all the planning that went into it. And pretty much nailed every single one of those targeted contacts, all the way from the city or community that my wife helped me film, all the way up to across the nation. So there's one more that I want to do, but I'm going to give some time, and that's targeted global communication. I've got a friend in Japan, and want to be able to figure out how to plan a contact with him where we can get it in the first shot.
Very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I was one of the follow-ups to that, and it's kind of related. One of the things I appreciated that you pointed out in your video, and Charlie and I know I've run into it, and I'm sure Charlie has too. One of the things that you run into, and you're geared, you gear your stuff more toward preparedness and that community. I really liked how you approach the folks that say, well, whenever it goes wrong, I'm just gonna use the radio. I don't really care about the FCC. And every time somebody brings that up to me, I say, that's great. I said, I'm a professional. I was in public safety for 10 years. I'm aviation now. And one of the things that you definitely don't do well is something the first time. And if you've never used it before, especially when you're under duress, something's going wrong, you're ultimately not going to be able to use the equipment effectively if you've never used it before in a situation where it doesn't really matter. and learning the process and learning the why and the where and the when and the how before you use it is super important. And that's usually what I stress to people. And I was really excited when I saw you stress that like, hey, if you don't train and use it, you might as well just leave it in the box because it's not going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm surprised how often that comes, and people think that they're just going to be able to pull that Baofeng or whatever radio they have purchased and just be this rock star operator. I mean, you guys know I've only been on the air now. May will be 3 years of total on air time, and I've been learning for all that time. I fail a lot. I share those failures, and I don't know how many cumulative hours that is, but I still don't feel prepared enough to handle what could possibly happen if I ever needed to race somebody in a real emergency. So yeah, training is my big thing. I recommend people getting their FCC license, starting with the tech, getting engaged in local communities like your local VHF, UHF nets, getting rolled into public service, because you do get a lot of practical hands-on experience that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I said, coming from my background, where communication is part of my life. It's been a part of my life since graduating high school, because I've been in some type of role where a radio was in my hand constantly in some capacity or another, and not knowing how to use it, at least having a basic understanding of what happens when you push the button and what the results you should expect for what you're using and the environment you're using it in, is really, it's not going to work out well. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And it's really important to train and use and practice with the equipment and have a good, more than superficial understanding of how it's supposed to work and the potential ways that it's not going to, so you can avoid them or at least work around them when it does pop up.
Yeah, and that's actually the other compelling reason why I got into Summits on the Air and SOTA. It's like a really good way just to get outdoors, get some exercise. But I also find that you have to bring all of your gear, not only your communications gear, but how to address any issues, because in a lot of cases we don't have access to the internet or cell, although that's not always the case. It's pretty decent these days. But all your support gear as well.
Absolutely.
Even just letting your spouses, your loved ones know where you are, and setting expectations of how long you're going to be out there, when to come back. So I also find SOTA as being a great gateway drug to actual training. And you could do it with VHF, UHF. You could do it with your tech license, a $35 Chinese radio, and get out there and start having fun and gaining some experience.
Yeah. Like here in Arizona specifically, if public safety, if the people that are coming to find you know where you are, you're generally going to be rescued out and in higher level of care within 24 hours of the time you push the 911 button. It's generally 24 hours is kind of what you need to be able to survive on your own before help's going to get to you and get out. And that's, for me, when I'm talking to people about SOTA, I'm big on have a plan, make sure you have the appropriate equipment, make sure you can self-rescue, because sometimes that might be the only option, and make sure people can find you. Because, I've heard this is more from the hiking community before I got into the SOTA and I was just doing hiking stuff. I would run into people all the time. Well, it's just me. I don't have any family. I don't have any friends. If I die out there, who cares? No one's, I said, that's not the case, because just because you don't care about yourself, there's an army of people that are going to come looking for you. And if someone got hurt or worse coming to find me, I would, and I especially if I didn't survive, I couldn't live with myself, because I set them up for that, because I put myself in an unsafe situation because I didn't care. Well, that's not really a responsible way of hiking or going out and doing stuff. So when I stress to people about going out and doing these outdoor activities, it's great to go out and take risks, stay within what you think you can do, but make sure you got a plan, make sure you have the appropriate gear to take care of yourself, and make sure people can find you, because if you have a responsibility to the community and to everybody else, because you may not care about you, but somebody does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've got a quick, probably 90-second story I want to share with you guys. So my uncle passed last year about this time, and he was an avid backpacker. And we did in the Sierras, Mount Whitney, about 35 years ago. And his dying wish was that we take his ashes and illegally scatter them on the top of the mountain. So we did that about back in October, and we planned for it. And at the last minute, a distant relative caught wind of it. He said he was an avid backpacker, wanted to go with us. He loved all of his ultralight gear, was a gearhead. And we're quite literally at Trailhead, and he tells us that number one, he's a type 1 diabetic, two, that his insulin pump stopped working, and both glucometers failed. I don't have a medical background, so I learned that I need to get my first aid training and some medical under my belt coming out of that experience. And he said it was going to be fun. It's happened before. He had his insulin. Well, we did a overnighter for that trip, and by the time we got to trail camp at 12,500 feet, he was still okay. Next morning we go to summit, and he goes completely sideways on us, and we basically had to do a rescue and call in a search and rescue. And one of the first things that I tried to do was do a rock scramble with my HT, got line of sight into Whitney Portal, got into the repeater, and there was nobody there listening or monitoring. So amateur radio completely failed, came back down, and forgot to mention the day before, it turns out he was carrying a Garmin InReach, which I know Charlie carries. And we had asked him before he went critical, how does this work? How do we use it? And we were able to beacon and send the SOS. And long story short, there was a lot of back and forth and latency. About 90 minutes later, VX-31, the Dust Devils out of China Lake, did a helo landing. They got the litter out, evacuated him, and then we packed out the next day. But he never really cared about the situation. Like, he didn't care about his own personal being, but it jeopardized everybody in our party is kind of the point, as well as the search and rescue team. I think Adam, K6ARK, saw that video, and he was like, as someone who's in search and rescue, that is a very dangerous rescue at 12,500 feet. So he put a large portion of people outside of the circle at risk. So I took a lot out of that exercise on multiple different levels. So yeah, it's a good point about letting people know where you are, having the right tools, and being aware that it's more than just yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. When Charlie and I, when we've done some more technical remote activations, we actually, before we even leave the car, we have a little briefing on what we're going to do, what equipment we have, and what the expectation is of the other person if the other person should become disabled to the point where they can't self-rescue, they can't walk. And that, for me, I started doing that because sometimes I'm hiking with people that don't have a level of expertise, or they don't have the background that I have. So I kind of set the expectations. Hey, if I'm unconscious, if I'm not able to do stuff, this is the equipment I have. This is how you activate the PLB. This is what I'm expecting you to do. You need to go do this. Don't worry about me at that point, because they'll find me eventually, but you need to do what you have to do to get yourself out of here, that kind of stuff. And I said, coming from my background, I'm a big proponent of making sure there's a plan, knowing everybody knows what their the expectations of the other person is if stuff goes sideways. Charlie knows about this, but about 2 years ago now, I had a solo. I was doing a exercise hike, not soda, but on the mountain behind me, and I fractured my elbow, broke my ulna and radius in 2 places right before sunset, splinted it myself, and hiked out 2 miles in the dark to get myself to the emergency room. And that was an experience that I don't want to repeat, but because I carry a SAM splint with me and all the gear, I was able to self-rescue. Otherwise, I probably would have been getting long lined off the mountain in the morning because it was dark. They would not have taken me off in the dark.
Yep, for sure. So let me just share another story. This one just happened yesterday. My wife and I, as you know, we would consider ourselves experienced hikers. My wife has 2 hiking buddies that she goes with, and they decided a while ago to go on a hike Saturday. And it was a hike where there's no cell service. You know this hike probably, Brian. It's Blacktop Mesa. It's out in the middle of the Superstition Wilderness, and there just isn't cell service. No cell service in the Superstition Wilderness unless you're on top of a high point. And I knew it was going to be a difficult hike for them, so I expected that they would be home by no later than 3:00. But when 5:00 rolled around, I'm like, okay, I'm at the point where I'm worried. And I texted my wife and asked, "Are you in cell phone range yet?" And I expected that when she got the message and read that it would be in cell phone, she was in cell phone range, she'd reply, but she never did. So I started packing my bags and I threw a bunch of flashlights and water and extra jackets and stuff, and started heading out the trailhead to possibly look for her. Well, as it turns out, her cell phone, the GPS was working, but for some reason she was not receiving or being able to send any text messages, and she didn't notice it until I got home and said, I never got your text. But I guess that's an example where other people in the party, if they had not known. So basically what I'm saying is that I knew where they were at the trailhead they were at, and I went out to kind of try to look for them. And there was the failure point was the cell phone. But another failure point, as we were talking about it, Sandy and I were talking about it, is that the spouses of the other two hiking partners with them had no idea where they were. They just knew that they went for a hike. And so that's a bad mistake. You should always make sure everybody in your party and somebody outside of your party that's related to you knows where you're going, or it's going to be a problem. So luckily everybody was okay. I was just the last one to find out that everybody was okay. So it's kind of funny now, but it's a lesson learned.
I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you want to finish up, Gaston, and then we'll take a break and go through some of the chat comments here.
No, let's hit the chat comments. I was just going to avoid an awkward silence.
Awkward silence. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let me go to the top here and address some of these. Let's see. So, I mentioned earlier that I couldn't remember what Richie goes by. He goes by Zippy. So again, thank you, Zippy, for your contribution. So what is Quartz Fest? We'll go back to that real quick. And what Quartz Fest is. One of you guys want to take a stab at that one?
Well, it was my first Quartz Fest, so I don't know if you guys have more experience than I do, but I look at it as a Burning Man for amateur radio. Basically, it's a kind of takeover of BLM land, whereby a bunch of RVers get together. There's some clinics around various topics in amateur radio. There's a potluck event, and it's just a place to just camp out, have a good time, and play radio and talk radio.
I think that's pretty good description.
Yeah, I'd say so. I wouldn't be able to put much more on top of that other than, it's a ham radio event, tell stories, and have a good time.
Yep. So like a ham radio convention. Then Lionel says, "Hey, that twig antenna is pretty cool." So compliment to you.
Oh, you know what I found out about that? I don't know if everybody is this way. So a quarter wave vertical is roughly about 19 inches on 2 meters. And I was trying to figure out what would be a good way to do the measurement in the field if you come across some wire. Well, for me, the length from the bottom of my elbow to the very top of my middle finger is almost exactly 19 inches. So I don't know, probably vary a few inches depending on how tall you are. But I thought that was kind of interesting when trying to figure out how to cut that antenna accordingly while I was out there without a measuring tape.
Yeah, cool. So Adam for K6ARK says that he had the same problem. This popped up when Brian was talking about how he had to strip the wires to make the contacts. He said he had a Delta loop feed point fail and hacked the vertical and ground plane out of it and then he stuffing the radial wire in the SO239. So that's the radiating wire. So that's pretty cool. He MacGyvered something as well. I've had an opportunity to do that as well on Turkey Peak when I was setting up. I went to go change the links in the dipole, and as I got up and started walking away, my foot caught a hold of the feed line to the radio and jerked it right out of the BNC. So it just completely came right out of the BNC, and the wire just completely disconnected because I caught it with my foot and yanked it. So I did the same thing, kind of stripped the wires and kind of did the best to plug it back together, and it worked. So,
I'm actually kind of curious. We've been throwing around the term MacGyver, and I think if you're under 40, nobody knows what that means. So I'm wondering how many people in the chat don't know what we mean when we say MacGyver.
Yeah, if you don't know what it is, somebody ought to explain it. You're probably the best for that.
Oh, well, they did rebrand MacGyver and brought it back, but it wasn't as good as the original one.
Yeah, so it was an actor, Richard Dean Anderson, who was also in Stargate SG-1, and it was an 80s program where this guy basically, I don't exactly know what his title was, but he'd go out and put himself into some very precarious situations helping out people. And he solved almost every single problem when it came down to like someone's life being on the line within seconds with a Swiss Army knife and duct tape was basically how he got out of every single situation. And it was the best part of the show. So if you can find MacGyver, the original one, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. Malin says, or wait, no, not Malin. Let's see. We go first. It's Dick says, if you have an outdoor emergency, have it with Gaston. So good comment.
Well, I don't know about that one. I tend to keep on pushing on. So
you're not gonna wait for Dick, huh?
Yeah.
And Malin says, always carry an inReach as well. Great for spotting. And so yeah, that's true. It's great for spotting. Let me see. There's probably one or two more comments that I didn't get to. So, but we'll get to those in just a minute. Let me now turn the time back over to Gaston because I wanted to talk a little bit, Gaston, about. So we were talking about being prepared. You talked a little bit about how you prepare when you're going outdoors and doing a portable activity. So can you go over some of the things? You may have done this in other streams, but just some of the things that you do that you keep in mind as you're preparing and getting ready to do a soda excursion.
Yeah, so typically what I'll do is first just check out the weather for that day, at least the forecast, to see what I'm dealing with, to figure out if I need to bring anything additional. I always bring my 10 essentials, regardless of it's 110 degrees or 30 degrees. So it may sound like I'm bringing extra gear and weight for some of those items, but absolutely critical. For the sodas in particular, what I will do is figure out which peak it is. I'll check to see if there are any prior people that have activated the peak and if they've included maps. If not, I will typically go into All Trails and create my own map for that peak. Either if they have, I'll look to see if they actually have a trail. If not, I'll look at the contour lines and figure out what is the best way to navigate it if I have to bushwhack for that peak. I always leave with my wife printed documents of where I'm going, who I'm going with, what time I'm leaving, where I plan to park, what time I plan to be on peak, how much time it's going to take me to get back, and how much buffer. And then same thing, if there are other people in the group, she always has access to their phone numbers, their email addresses, their spouse's address, or phone, so she can contact them if anything comes up. And then the big thing out here is water. So there are no water sources out here. Digging is rough in a dry creek bed. I've tried it once, and it is just not what you want to do if you're really thirsty. So I tend to bring most of my weight is actually in water weight out here. So just anticipate what you can and just let everybody know where you're going, and just make sure that you have the right gear, right down to like sunscreen, and just keeping yourself protected, the right gear for the elements you're going to be in.
Yeah. Brian, what about you? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to basically say exactly what Tom was talking about. Just make sure you have the one thing I do tell people to add to your preparedness list is try and find out what the primary agency is that covers the public safety in that area, and include that direct telephone number. Because like right now, if I'm hiking up in Yavapai County and my wife dials 911 and says, hey, Brian was supposed to be home 3 hours ago and hasn't gotten home. She's going to get the Mesa Police Dispatcher, who is going to transfer it to DPS, who is going to transfer it to eventually Yavapai County when they figure out that it's Yavapai County. But that could take, from prior experience of being on the other end of this, that could take 20 minutes for them to figure it out. And that's 20 minutes lost if you're really in trouble. So one of the things I include in my plan is always, where am I going? And this is the telephone number for that sheriff's department.
Yeah, that's a good one. One thing that I always do is I always leave with my wife, either written form if she's not home, or at least verbally. I say, I'm going out and I expect me home no later than X. If you don't hear from me by X, then that means I'm in trouble. And then I of course I have to make sure that I communicate that I'm safe at least by that time, or else she's going to be sending people out. So I leave a little cushion. But so, for example, if I'm going up and it's going to be a long day up north in the snow, and there's a possibility that I could get in trouble, I say I do all the calculations. I know that I should be home by 5 o'clock. So then I tell her, if I'm not home by 9, or if you don't hear from me by 9, then please call rescue at that point. So that's kind of how one of the other things I'd add, I guess.
So on that note, Charlie, the other thing I typically include, I can't remember if it's in the 10 essentials, but I always bring with me the small bivvies. So if I do get caught overnight, it's the kind of thing that you can either, get in, or even the trash bags. That's what we used to use in the Boy Scouts. But the bivvies now are so nice and compact, and they're reflective now, and they've got the orange Mylar on the outside in a lot of cases. And it's absolutely critical gear. So I always like to have a bivvy with me just in case I have to ride something out either overnight or 4 or 5 hours past what I'm expecting to be.
That's in my pack as well.
Yep, mine too.
Yeah, that's absolutely in my pack as well.
All right, guys, let's take a minute and get back over to the chat. There's quite a few more comments that this generated, and so let's hit some of those. So back on the Mount Whitney thing, Adam says the key learning points for the Whitney trip is turn around and go down when you or your partners have altitude illness symptoms or other problems, and don't leave an ill person behind to wait for you. Yeah.
Yep.
And then K6 SUD says, for my soda, each time I go out, 3 people know my route, and one tracks on, and then he has one tracks on the APRS. When check in regularly, so he checks in regularly as well, and then so far it's worked well. And that's to my comment about kind of the failure we had amongst my wife and her hiking partners and us, the people who were worried about them. So yeah, it's important. Then we have Lionel, who says he was wondering about the cost after you push the button. I think you put that in the comments, Gaston, but
there are 2 there, right? Adam had a good response to it. So in our case, we did not get charged. It was Inyo County Search and Rescue. It was completely free. We didn't have a bill. I don't know what the hospital bill was, if anything, but I think his local insurance covered it. And Garmin has the option for the person who has the service under their name can pay a small fee for like that'll cover up to $100,000. So that wasn't used, but it was an option. So it's probably worth doing some research and exploring. It's the kind of thing now where, in hindsight, I know that the annual cost is expensive. There are 3 different plans outside of the one-time purchase for the device. But again, we were told that our cousin probably would have died if we had waited any longer to get him to the hospital for medical attention. So if it's, $300 a year and you're an avid outdoorsman, I will tell you that amateur radio absolutely fell flat on its face. And that was the only thing that really saved the day. So it's up to you and your budget and how comfortable you feel going out there. But.
Yep. Cool. And then, yeah, Adam, like you said, had the comment, SAR is free almost everywhere in the U.S. There are a few exceptions. So if you do need an air ambulance or medical transport, that's a different story. So it just kind of depends, like you said.
U.S. Navy didn't charge us.
Yeah. Okay, then back up here, just comment, APRS is good to have with you. And I want to get into that because I know you've done experiments with APRS, haven't you, Gaston?
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on it. I have had probably a 65 to 70% success rate with APRS. And a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure that's available in the area. But more than anything, it's actually the radio that I use for APRS is not well suited. So I use either the FT60 or the VX6R from Yaesu, and those do not have built-in APRS capabilities. Yeah. And that's where the failure point is. I actually pair it with a device that has been unobtainable for probably a year now called the MobiLink D TNC. And it's a little Bluetooth TNC that has a cable that will go to various HTs, and you pair it with your phone. So lots of different pieces in the chain. And the biggest failure for me has been the button on that unit. You squeeze the case in the wrong way, you get on top and your battery's dead. I've had that happen probably 30% of the time. Now I have a piece of plastic over the button with the rubber band inside of an Altoid case, and I still wouldn't trust it with my life. So I'm actually going to be moving to a new HT that has built-in APRS capabilities. But even then, you're limited to your ability to get into a digipeater that can put your packet out there so that either other RF stations can hear it or an internet gateway can pick it up and put it on the internet. I use it more than anything for the SMS gateway capabilities. But now that I have a Garmin inReach, that's less important to me. So APRS is cool, but personally, my experience is it's more flaky and a novelty. When it works, but when it fails, it just outright fails.
I use APRS too. I carry a Kenwood D72A, which does a very good job with the APRS. The one nice thing about the APRS is you can do one-way email. So I have sent one-way emails from the radio for updates on what's going on because that goes out. My main thing, even if the APRS isn't hitting a digipeater, in my profile with for the PLB, I have listed in there that I carry a radio and I'm routinely beaking APRS with the -7 SSID on there. And I kind of look at it, well, okay, if I'm beaconing it and I'm down and I either can't talk or something's going on, the radio is going to keep going off for a while before the battery dies. And if somebody's flying around in a helicopter and they know that they can pick up the APRS beacon, they're going to get a packet blast with lats and longs in it. Is it 100%? No, but it's something. So I usually always carry it, and it's usually beaconing the entire time. I do have that mobile link TNC, but I actually use that in my vehicle. So I pair that to a Kenwood V71A, and I run that on my phone. So when I'm out driving in the backcountry to get to the SOTA site, I'm beaconing that along the way with the higher power radio, and then it's just off once I get out. But that's the only time I really use the mobile linked.
You know, you mentioned, do you use the email-2 gateway?
I haven't done it in a little while, but I have a little card that I keep in my bag that has the instructions on how to do it because I don't do it enough to be able to bring it up from memory. Like one side, I've got how to send the email, and then the other side of the card is how to spot via the SOTA gateway on APRS. So that way I get the string right, because it's a very specific string you have to send for the handshake to happen for it to go out into the internet. If you don't do it right, it doesn't work.
Yeah, so I do the same laminated business card as well. But the cool thing about putting email-2, which isn't free, we probably should support the developer for that, is that you can send it to a non-ham. So the payload is like an email address, space, and a short message. And what I like about it is that I can send an email to my wife, and part of the payload, in addition to that very short message, it includes an inline map with the geo coordinates. So my wife can give this, in our case, to the sheriff's department, which is responsible for search and rescue here. So she doesn't even need to think about it. And it's just one packet that goes out. So that's pretty cool feature.
Yeah. Moving on here, we've got KD2YDN. He says, first aid knowledge is the best gift you can give your community and other outdoorsmen. And a similar comment from KE5EES is first aid training, just rub some dirt in it. And then he says, just kidding. I teach CPR for continuing education for free, cheaper than CE hours online. So, but the point for both of those is I think there was another one for wilderness training. Then there's this one here. I have had wilderness first aid, stop the bleed, CPR classes. Highly recommend all of them, as do I. They're important.
Charlie, you took the Knowles Wilderness First Aid class, correct?
I did,
last year.
Yes.
How'd you like that one?
I thought it was excellent. I think it all comes down to your instructor. The material in the book is great and it's important, but the instructor makes a huge difference as well. And of course, they recommended that big, thick book. I can't remember the name of it now, but it costs like a couple $100 or something like that. But that book, I still haven't bought it, but I want to buy it because it has a lot of great information in it. I'll put that in the notes, the name of it, unless you guys can remember what it is. So, but anyway, yeah, it's wilderness training is, especially if you're doing SOTA and you're going out into remote areas, definitely something that I think everybody should do. Ian says he always leaves a note to his YL what somebody's going on, what number, and the landowner. He's an Aussie guy, so his requirements are just a little different. The landowner thing is what I'm talking about. We don't have to worry about that here, do we? And then also, not usually anyway, Ken says, also, if you make a plan with a partner out in the wilderness, stick to that plan. I've stopped going with several people because they can't understand it and don't come prepared.
Yep.
Yeah. for sure.
Same.
Yeah. Same as well. So we've got a lot more other comments that were generated, but let's go back into a topic here before the show ends. Let's talk a little bit more about just what you like to operate, Gaston. What are your preferred what's your preferred radio gear? The things you take with you most of the time. I know you experiment. I know, for example, there have been times where you've really liked to do the 2-meter sideband stuff, and then you've kind of transitioned to you've experimented with WinLink before, but just kind of talk about your progression there, and then maybe what right now what you like to take out in the field.
Yeah, so I've covered just about everything from VHF, UHF, voice, and digital, all the way to doing all the same things on HF. Right now, my absolute go-to is going a little bit more minimal and I guess lighter weight as far as what I've traditionally done. And I enjoy QRP operation. So my go-to radio has always been and still is the Yaesu FT818ND, which sadly is now discontinued. I tend to run those in a very different format than most people do. I like to run them with aluminum frames by a company called Armorlock. And then I designed, after about 18 months of not having the right bag to put that in, I designed a custom bag that I'm in the works of selling in small batches right now, called the TTP Man Pack. And the cool thing about that bag is that it is a full kit. It actually even includes a internal pouch with wire pass-throughs that includes the battery, the antenna system as well, so I could just quickly pull it out, and it is literally open the flap and get operating. The modes that the bands and modes I really enjoy working these days are 2 meters, obviously, on sideband. So for that, I use the Pactana Trek mount with a couple of BNC HT antennas, and use the trekking pole as the mast. But for HF, I'm actually moving more towards regional contacts, and I really like resonant monoband dipoles. Right now I'm moving to a linked multi-5-band dipole that I'm designing with Tim, and very low to the ground. But again, my goal is I enjoy talking to people in my state and in the Southwest, and I have incredible luck out here running antennas as low as 6 foot on the apex, and then using my trekking poles at the end at about 4 feet, and running everything
I remember
from
that, right? Remember, it was like on top of that peak over by Sunset Crater, right? You were
you were there
that?
for one of those where people told me I couldn't do what I was doing. I don't even think I was at 4 feet that time, quite honestly.
You weren't, no.
And it was a really good activation. But yeah, I love that style of operation because the antenna fits in the palm of your hand. And the new one I have right now, I designed it. It's a modified version of Tim and 9 SAB's antenna that does 20 and 40. I don't care about 20 so much, but I wanted to work all of the bands that can be deployed for near vertical incident skywave propagation, and basically just shower down that signal in the region. And I will work 40 meters during the day. I'm going to start experimenting with 60. It supports that. And then I bounce back and forth between 75 meters for voice and 80 meters for digital. And on the 80 meter side, typically these days now I'm doing, getting into JS8 call, but doing more with FL Digi and FL Message with my group. The farthest station that I've been working consistently is out in Henderson, Nevada, about 220 miles. And we have a straight shot pretty much on 40, 75, and 80, depending on time of day for both voice and digital. So that's kind of my preferences, just a pack that's this size with all those goodies I described.
One of the things I like about your philosophy, I mean, there's several, but one of them that I just remembered when we went on this hike together and did that, and you had that NVIS, and it was 3 feet off the ground or whatever. And I remember our discussion, and I so subscribe to this, and that is, you can have people tell you all day till they're blue in the face that the science is a certain way, but until you take it out in the field and you put it to the test, you don't know. And the science, the way they describe it, may or may not be true. And yeah, like you said, there are people that were telling you that is not the way to do it, but yet you were making contacts. So, I mean,
well, it's funny. I encourage you guys to watch my current video that's out there, not the short, but the Quartz Fest video, because I brought that link dipole that I'm testing, and at the very end there, It was the last morning I was there. I got up at, well, I was up already, but at 06:30 local time, there is a net on HF on figures 3.868. And it's a bunch of guys in the Phoenix area. So I was about 120 miles from that location. And I knew I was doing NVIS. I was running lowish power. And the antenna was literally off the RV about 8 feet. So the RV was causing some issues. The ends, again, were at 4 feet with the poles. And the other guy on the end was running a kilowatt. And he has told me many times that you can't do what you're doing on 5, 20, or even 100 watts. And I'm like, I don't know. This is the 4th time I've made a video where we've made a contact and you give me a good signal report. So, yeah, I enjoy modest antennas.
Yep. Vince says that link dipole video is worth watching no matter your purpose. Very interesting indeed. Yep. And then Adam, sometimes convenience is worth the trade-off. Yep. And that was on the other comment.
Yeah. Link dipoles are king with me. That's all I've been using for SOTA since Activation 18 now. In fact, it's the same link dipole. And I also use a link dipole for my QRO stuff when I do POTA. And yeah, that's all I use.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit about what you do, Brian, and compare and contrast with Gaston.
So, I'm first of all, I like light and simple because 2 things I learned throughout my professional life is the more parts you have, the more likely you are to lose them or to have a failure or have something not work right. So take as many failure points out of the system as you can and get it down to a simple level, because I don't want to spend 20 minutes setting up. Generally, if I get up to the top of a summit, from the time I drop the bag till the time I'm launching RF, it's less than 10 minutes.
Yep.
And that's for me, that's it. Now, I started out doing a mixture of phone and CW, but again, because I like carrying water and food, things that are more important to me, I've pared myself down to a little 4-watt 4-band QRP CW radio, and I primarily do CW. With that, I've got a link dipole that's cut for 3 of the 4 bands the radio is capable of doing, because the radio can do 20, 30, 40, and 80 meters. I don't have an 80 meter leg on it because I don't really activate during times when 80 meters does have any value to anybody. And that radio gets run off of a 3 amp hour Bioenno battery that I can do about 12 activations on before I have to charge it. Roughly it breaks down about 2 hours in activation before it starts getting down to the I should probably charge it, it's going to shut off level. And then I have a roll-up J-pole, an N9 TAX roll-up J-pole that gets strapped to the pole, and that gets hooked up to the HT. I have a BNC connector and a BNC rubber duck that gets attached to the radio, so I don't have to worry about it. I keep a spare antenna in the bag that's SMA, so I can if the BNC fails, I can just take it off and screw the factory one on, and I still have the use of the radio. Plus, I have an adapter for the another adapter in there as well for the N9TX antenna, and generally that gets strapped to the pole, and then it gets putting it into an inverted V. I've got the vertical on the pole, and I've got the inverted V, and that gets fed with RG173. My whole kit for SOTA, just the radio stuff in the bag, weighs less than 5 pounds. That includes the HT, the radio, the battery, antenna, pole, everything. It's less than 5 pounds. And I've had thousands of contacts on that setup without a problem.
Yeah, that's nice.
Are you running carbon fiber or fiberglass for your mast?
I am running the cheapest Chinese pole that I can buy off Amazon in quantity. So the one I get, it collapses to about 16 inches, and I believe it's not carbon fiber. I don't use the carbon fiber. I do have a carbon fiber one, and the first time I tried using the carbon fiber one with the N9TX J-pole, the SWR was off the roof because it interacted with the antenna really bad.
You need to run it at an angle. Malin, who's in the chat, told me, and that's what I've done is I kind of cant it, and it's been pretty good.
Yeah, the ones I use now are just regular. Like I said, they're inexpensive. They cost less than $30, and I usually buy them 2 at a time. I reinforce the bottom with 2 or 3 layers of heat shrink, bright yellow, so I can find it if I drop it. I take the top segment out. I bend a piece of coat hanger wire into a hook. I drop it in the top portion. I epoxy it in there so it's part of the antenna. And then I put another piece of heat shrink over the top of that to reinforce the very top. And it's been going like gangbusters. I think I'm using my 3rd one now in 10 years. So that they last a really long time before they start to fail.
Yeah, you need to drop a link. That sounds really appealing at that price point.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it in Amazon. Because that's generally, I just do a quick search on it and I'll find it and I'll drop a link for you.
Yeah. Good stuff. We got 5 minutes left, or 4.5. And let me just real quickly mention I kind of had the same setup as Brian. I kind of copy him because I know that he knows what he's talking about. And plus I've over the years, been doing Soda 8 years. So that means he's been doing it 9 or more. And so with that setup, we've been able to, be very successful. I will say that, I subscribe to light and simple as well. But when you're experimenting, I don't know if you get this as well, Gaston, but when you're experimenting, things that become more complicated and heavy. It's just, you kind of get used to stuff and it's very simple and compact. But then when you want to expand out, then it's, for me, I want to have redundancy. And Brian mentioned some redundancy, and you did too as well. And so I usually take my go-to gear plus some of the other stuff that I want to test. And so, but that's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah. I will typically, my backup is to go from HT to HF. I always have my Slim Jim roll-up N9TX J-pole in addition to whatever antenna. But yeah, if HF doesn't pan out or HT vice versa, I'll just switch to the other set of bands and vice versa.
Cool. So then it keeps it light.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, we are at the end. Let me just remind everybody who's in chat and watching, and those of you who may be listening later, there's a live stream that's going to be taking place here. I think it's going to be an hour from now. Jason, Ham Radio 2.0, is going to be talking about the Quartz Fest, and I think that Gaston is going to be hopping over there. Gaston, I think he first mentioned that it was going to be right after this, but I think it's going to be another hour now because he's taking a little longer to get home. So I'll shoot you a message after this and let you know exactly what time. But look for his channel, those of you who follow Jason, and hop over there. With that, I really appreciate you, Gaston, coming on board and visiting with us. Brian, it's glad to have you here as always. Is there any last departing words from you, Brian?
Nothing. I was just wanted actually Gaston to take the last minute and plug his MCOM tools, because that's really interesting. We've kind of ran out of time, but I wanted to hear about that really fast.
Go for it.
Yeah. So the elevator speech, it is an off-grid, offline first emergency communication platform that I had been working on for about 2 years. It initially started life on the Raspberry Pi as a field tool to look up FCC call signs, remote operator bearings and distance for using directional antennas, and then also to simplify the issue you ran into and I ran into of how do we simplify APRS, because every gateway has a different format. So it also encapsulated, I just want to send a text message, and it initializes everything under the hood. When I switched off the Raspberry Pi and found a ruggedized line of CF or Panasonic Toughbooks, I switched to that, and now the project has ballooned into something that is much bigger than it used to be, has offline mapping capabilities, has peer-to-peer messaging using some modems under the hood. Even in the latest version, I've integrated the Voice of America prediction tools for HF completely offline. So I actually have the sunspot smoothing numbers going out 6 months and use the command line version. And I'm building a front end that looks like www.voacap.com/HF, but it all runs without the internet. So the prediction isn't as good because the data can go stale. So it's basically a Swiss Army knife, back to our MacGyver talk, on basically digital communications platform when you don't have the internet.
Cool. Well, so let me just say real quick, we have a few more minutes if we want to explore a few more topics, because unless you got to run, Gaston, because confirmed, Jason's stream starts in an hour from now. And the link to that has been put in the chat by Tank Radio. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about, Brian, or ask him?
Well, actually, I was going to, since we were talking about the MCOM tools, one of the things that he talked about in one of his recent interviews that I thought was amusing and might be a good story for people to hear about was there's you're working on some encryption protocols, and you got a phone call from somebody about that. So maybe you could tell us about that a little bit, because I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so I'm a realist, and we use encryption everywhere, every day, to secure our financial transactions. It's part of the internet. I don't think that the radio community has evolved with current trends. and privacy. So I have personally built a prototype that I've never transmitted over the air, but I have the capability, whether you're sharing your position in the offline map, doing a message using AES 256-bit encryption. And I'm actually testing it using two sound cards with 3.5 millimeter cables crossed. So the output of one audio signal is going into the input of the second station and vice versa. And with things like FL message and FL amp that provide checksumming and forward error correction, every bit makes it at some point. So probably in the next 3 months, I'm going to be showing how I've actually incorporated encryption into all of the digital mode communication. Again, not legal right now. I don't know what the issues are, but the phone call I received, and it's really a follower on Instagram, works for the NSA, and he is part of their Linux group that works on various secure versions of Linux. And he says, hey, our bosses haven't caught wind of this yet. We don't know what the issue is, but you're making the rounds internally. And we'd all love to get early access copy of MCOM tools to pound on the encryption over RF piece. So it's very friendly, but the 3-letter NSA acronym was thrown around. And actually, I know, Charlie, you have to go, but I was at a Hamfest Thunderbird Amateur Radio Club like 2.5 weeks ago. And I was breaking down the equipment. I was doing some MCOM tools demos. And this dude comes, and he's about 6'5", giant beard, scarf, wraparound sunglasses, layered clothing. He's like, you doing any demos? Like, yeah, I was breaking down. What do you want? And he was asking me questions about how does this work for international markets? Does it support non-Latinate languages? I'm like what? He's like, oh, like Farsi and character sets. And I was with a couple of other guys that are law enforcement in the Phoenix metro area. And I didn't pick up on it right away. He's like, dude, that guy was like spec ops 100%. And he's looking at your tech as potentially doing some overseas shadiness. So I thought that was kind of funny.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Cool. Well, we could probably talk another hour or more, Gaston. You're such a good guest. Appreciate you coming on. Look forward to getting out with you again and doing some crazy thing like Elephant Mountain, which we shall not mention anymore, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Well,
Brian,
thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I enjoyed the questions and the conversation, Gaston. Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure, guys.
Yep. Thank you as
Thanks
well.
for everybody who joined.
Yep. Thanks everybody who joined. We're going to end the live, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.